Hello, 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 hello! Welcome to Insureblocks, your dedicated podcast to blockchain and smart contracts. I'm Walid Al-Saqqaf, your host. For this week's podcast, we're going to be discussing end-to-end solutions against COVID-19 with special insights from Blok Bioscience. And I'm very pleased to have returning to Insureblocks Areiel Wolanow, CTO of Blok Bioscience and Managing Director of Insureblocks. Areiel, thank you for joining us today. For those listeners who haven't heard you in our first podcast, could you please give them a quick introduction on yourself and on Blok Bioscience?
Hi, Walid. Thanks. And it's great to be back. My name's Areiel. I've been working in the blockchain space for, is it 6 years now? It's a long time.
Wow.
I still don't think there are any experts in blockchain because we are all still figuring out a lot as we go. But I've had the good fortune to work on a number of really interesting solutions, from trade finance to insurance, and now working in the biotech industry on something that's really needed.
Excellent. So, as you'll recall, our first question is always, could you please explain to our listeners what is blockchain and how does it work? But here, I'm curious to see if your definition has changed since the last time you were on the show due to the work you're now doing at Blok Bioscience.
So if memory serves, the definition I gave you hasn't changed much, which is that blockchain is a technology that allows multiple companies or people to share a single version of the truth without having to spend any time, effort, or money on reconciliation, messaging, synchronization, or other such, and that the benefit from gained from that sharing often allows completely new business models or new ways of solving problems to be possible. In terms of how it's changed, I think the main thing that's changed is a very welcome maturation of thought. Blockchain, I think it's fair to say, is no longer a thing. It is a toolkit for solving problems and for accomplishing what previously would take large numbers of people or expensive software solutions that can now be taken for granted. When two people are talking and one is sharing, I found this amazing new app on my phone. What I wouldn't say to you is, I found this amazing new app on my phone and it runs the IP stack. That's a given. So if we are now talking about a solution, and that solution includes our two companies having a common record of a piece of data, the presumed solution is that you would use blockchain so that you would share that single solution rather than to have to create a business function, hire people, or build software to keep our version of that data and yours in sync.
Great. And I have very fond memories of our podcast where you took us all the way back to the Sumerians to talk about the Bula. But I'll let our listeners to check it out for those who haven't had the chance to.
Actually, I noticed on your webpage that Keith Bear actually commented on the Bula in a similar context about tokenization.
Indeed.
I was very pleased to see that.
It is a small world. So in our last podcast, I introduced you as a managing director of Insureblocks. Now, you've added to that the role of CTO of Blok Bioscience. What is Blok Bioscience and what is your mission?
Blok Bioscience is a team of thought leaders in the medical industry, thought leaders in technology, thought leaders in supply chain, who've grouped together because we think that a solution is needed fast, that it needs to reflect how quickly things are changing, and that it needs to represent delivering the best possible medical, diagnostic, and supply chain capability to fight the unprecedented impact that COVID-19 is having on the world. Insureblocks has entered into a business partnership with Blok, and we are providing the technology delivery capability. But that's only one piece of Blok. Blok is also about the medical expertise, supply chain, and the network of relationships, to get things where they need to go. And together, we are creating the solution that we're talking about today.
Excellent. So just to confirm, this Blok Bioscience was created because of the present pandemic, or was it created prior to that?
Blok Solutions, which is this group of thought leaders, was already created. What we did is mobilize specifically to solve this problem. We've been working on it, pretty much since COVID first started, emerging from China in late January.
Okay, great. So the coronavirus pandemic has obviously created enormous challenges for people around the world, but especially also for the lawmakers. On one hand, they have to keep their citizens safe, and on the other, they need to reboot the economy without inviting a second wave of COVID-19 cases. And to further complicate matters, they have to source massive stock of COVID-19 tests, quality PPE, which is personal protective equipment, and ventilators from a very limited global supplies and manufacturing capabilities. Now, I understand that you've been working on a digital platform to address those challenges for some major G20 entities and global enterprises. I'd love for you to give us, a high-level presentation of your platform before we dig into each of its components.
Sure, happy to. The bewildering number of questions that senior business executives and government leaders have to juggle is unprecedented. Let's start with the medical science. The scientific community does not use words like immunity or protection lightly or without a great deal of consideration. When somebody says this vaccine confers immunity to this disease, they are encapsulating and summarizing, in most cases, years of scientific study before they're willing to make that claim. So recently, when the WHO came out and said, we're not sure that the IgG antibody is a marker of immunity, this is not intended to say, we don't think this is worthy of research, or our understanding to date is not true. It's saying we haven't tested it. We have not subjected that claim to a level of scientific rigor that would allow us to say, yes, the IgG antibody confers immunity. If you'll recall back when AIDS was first emerging into the world's consciousness, there was the same debate about the HIV virus, that we needed to research whether or not it really was the virus that causes AIDS. So this is no different. What's different is because the fact that it has brought the world's economy to a standstill, the world is demanding answers of the scientific community far faster than they are normally required to give those answers. And that results in a great deal of uncertainty. The media, elected politicians, and senior decision makers are not used to making these kind of decisions with that level of uncertainty. And it makes working on it very difficult. So providing an answer needs to address all of these questions in a holistic way and provide not only, say, a test capability or a set of scientific studies or indeed a technical platform, but a holistic end-to-end solution that encapsulates all of that. And that's really the ambition that Blok Bioscience was set up to tackle.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think it's spot on. We keep hearing different types of advice, coming from world leaders. You can do X, but make sure you don't do Y. And then you can do Y, but under Z conditions. And it keeps to be constantly evolving because, there is this need for answers based on very little data that they have to be able to make decisions on. So we touched, about immunity, and I understand, the first component of your end-to-end solution is about immunity passports. Now, these have been talked a lot in the press, in terms of, but there is still questions with regards to their effectiveness and data privacy. Could you start off by telling us a little bit about, what does immunity passport mean to you? How you're looking to implement it, and just give it us as much information as you can.
Sure, happy to. The WHO issued a warning about immunity passports about a week and a half ago, and the warning was entirely correct. Just because you have an attested digital or even paper certification that says you have this antibody does not necessarily mean you're immune to anything. It means you have the antibody. So designing a protocol that uses that is really speaking about risk mitigation, levels of confidence, and so forth. So an immunity passport is not, I have an app on my phone that says I'm immune, therefore I'm completely safe. What it says is I have an attested record that I can trust that says what my medical status is. It still remains up to medical science to determine the validity, the level of confidence, and what diagnostic guidance relates to having this antibody, or to having had the symptoms, detecting the presence of the antigen, or anything that a medical procedure can detect. The point, though, of the immunity passport is that data is and should be and should always belong to the individual, the person who had the test. It should not belong to the government. It should not belong to the person's medical insurer or their employer. Now, that creates a little bit of a conundrum because employers need to understand your medical status in order to determine whether it's safe for you to return to work. But by current law, an employer can't ask you about detailed health questions. How do you square that circle? How do you provide employers a way to get people back to work without creating a set of data that breaches everything we know and believe about data privacy and the principle that people should own their data? The main purpose of the immunity passport is to provide the individual with an attested record of their antibody test and symptom status that employers, governments, transportation networks can use in a way that doesn't compromise the self-sovereignty of that person's data.
So with regards to self-sovereignty, is this something for you that means you're going to be implementing this solution in a self-sovereign kind of manner, or and what are the implications of that? Because here, what I'm thinking, are you looking at something that has central databases, distributed databases? Is it going to be anonymous? Is it going to be cryptographically secured? From an implementation standpoint, how are you going to ensure all of this to happen?
Sure. I've been, obviously, I'm a long-term follower of your podcast, and I know that you've discussed self-sovereignty with a number of people before. And I've been tracking self-sovereignty technology for a while now. There are a number of major efforts around self-sovereignty being led by some really smart people doing some amazing work. None of them have really emerged as a standard, and they're all dealing with some very thorny issues. We have to get this solution into people's hands very fast because people are at a huge level of risk and the economy is at a standstill. So one of the early questions we had to ask is, how can we ensure self-sovereignty in a rock-solid way before any of these competing standards have emerged in a way that allows us to embrace any or all of these standards while at the same time being fast and not making any unnecessary compromises. The way we decided to do that is to keep all of an individual's data on their mobile device. And that allows us a level of design simplicity and design elegance that gives me the ability to answer the question about databases to say, we actually don't need one. And let me walk you through how this works.
Please.
If you were downloading the Immunity Passport app onto your phone, in the onboarding process, you would do several things. You would take a picture of an ID that was valid in the country that you lived in. You would take a selfie using the app. You could not choose a picture from your photo library. You had to take a selfie live using the app. And you would give us consent to store that data on your app. Okay, it never leaves your phone. It's there on the phone. You then go through an attestation process where you would confer with or meet with a designated agent of the government or the enterprise that had the immunity passport or that was using it, and you would show an agent of that government or enterprise the selfie that you took on your phone, your physical ID that you took a picture of, and the picture on the phone. The agent would look at all four of those things: you, your selfie, your physical ID, and the photo of your ID, and verify that all four of those things were the same, and then would indicate on their version of the app, the agent version of the app, that you are now attested. This allows you to be fully onboarded and to use all the capabilities. So every other time you go up, all you have to do is to say, I'm me. You show the QR code in the app. The person who is drawing your blood, giving you a test, letting you into a building, would scan that QR code and say, yes, this person is who they say they are. You can draw their blood. You can let them into the building, what have you. If you think back to my description of this interaction, at no point do we even have your name. You're not even entering your name on there. The person who's attesting your ID attests that you are who you say you are. The name is not written down. There is not a database with your name. There is not a name field in your app. We don't need to know that. We need to know that you are who you say you are, and that's it. So the self-sovereignty is protected, one, by the fact that we actually never record who you are, and two, the physical evidence, that picture of your passport or your residence card, that never leaves your phone. There's no API that allows anybody to query it. There's no database that stores it, and all of the test results are there. The install of the app on your phone allows us a way to communicate back and to give you good guidance that is specific to your antibody status, your symptoms, so we can give the right guidance and never need to collect anything or know anything about who you are. So when you go into work and you say, I'd like to return to work, and they say, can you? You show the QR code to the security guard, and all the security guard, they see the selfie that you took to make sure that you haven't given your phone to someone else, and they see a red X or a green check saying whether or not you're free to you're free to enter the building. All the rest, that security guard doesn't need to know. They just need to know whether to let you in. They don't need to know your name, anything about you. So we can provide all of this information in a way that allows governments and enterprises to do their job without compromising who you are. Likewise, the data about your medical test and your symptom status is absolutely vital to epidemiologists, to companies to plan, when their workforce can come back to work. But they don't need to know who you are to draw those inferences. So this is being done in a way that is a subset of any of the emerging self-sovereignty standards, far exceeds the anonymization and de-identification regulations in the most restrictive places, for instance, HIPAA or CMS in the USA, and still allows all of the inference and the insight the government and an enterprise needs to do its job.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier on, this was done, rapidly within a limited amount of time. But if you had more time, what would success look like, in your opinion, for such an immunity passport? If you had to do, let's say, version 2 of it and you had more time?
Well, success in the first instance is about getting people safely back to work.
Yeah.
Allowing them to earn a living, allowing companies to not go under, and allowing government to ensure the health and safety of its population. That is, far more important than our commercial success in the short term. To do this and to provide this, obviously, we need to make enough money to keep the company going. But success, in the short term, has some very, very specific KPIs that we are all feeling the pinch of right now. Going forward, we would see this as a way of providing the same sort of information on a much larger scale. So for those of you who have traveled extensively in Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America, many places you have to prove your immunization status for yellow fever, for instance, by carrying this yellow booklet, which is a paper record of your immunization status. In many countries, you're asked for an immunization record of vaccinations you would receive as an infant for measles or mumps. We see this as a way forward to provide that information in a reliable way without creating a central database of health records.
Now, I've noticed also that throughout your explanation, you haven't mentioned the word blockchain. Does blockchain play a role in this now, or do you see it play a role in the future?
Absolutely, it plays a role. As I said, this is a full stack solution. It's not just about the immunity passport. Blockchain plays a key role in several areas. One is that it provides a level of validation of the test results. They don't necessarily have to be linked to you, but they do need to be reliable, and they are at risk. Just 2 days ago, the cybersecurity authorities for both the US and Britain issued a communique saying that state-sponsored hackers are currently actively working to penetrate labs, universities, pharmaceutical companies to steal work that is being done on vaccinations and other COVID-19 fighting measures. This is not a risk. This is actually happening. An immutable record of test results is going to be absolutely critical. A way of authorizing the sharing of these results for scientific cooperation, for cooperation between enterprise trade groups, for cooperation between governments is critical. Doing that in a way that respects the sovereign data residency requirements of one country versus another is critical. The fortunate thing, so there's nothing special about blockchain as a technology for doing all of these things, except that it's already solved most of these problems. So, because work on these sorts of capabilities has been going on for several years now in the blockchain space, we have design patterns that have already been implemented that do all of these things. So blockchain is a key delivery accelerator in getting these capabilities live fast.
And that's a key, what you just said, is a key delivery accelerator. But just to confirm here, you don't believe traditional technology could have had the same impact as blockchain in terms of being an accelerator?
Everything that you could do in blockchain, you could do in traditional technology. It's possible to distribute a relational database. It's possible to make a database immutable. This was always true. That these capabilities were developed in the 1990s. What blockchain does is removes a lot of cost, a lot of technical overhead, a lot of cost of ownership that requires a lot less maintenance because these things automatically happen. So there's no magic, there's no rocket science. If you look at Hyperledger Fabric, for instance, the premier consensus algorithm for Hyperledger Fabric is based on a technology called Byzantine fault tolerance.
Yeah.
That was developed in the 1990s as a way of keeping databases in sync with each other across vast geographical distances. So none of the technology is new. And as you recall from my previous podcast, none of the concepts are new. The concepts are about 12,000 years old.
Yes.
So what blockchain does is says, we've put together solutions and design patterns that you can use now, rather than having to build it from scratch.
Yeah. So, you mentioned testing, in your previous answer. Do you have a component that looks at, how you can facilitate the testing of entire populations?
Yes, obviously, and it has to. You pointed out, just how fast things are changing. If you recall, when COVID first became a concern in the UK, the supply of face masks sold out, and it was impossible to get them. 2 weeks later, we started hearing, well, face masks aren't that really effective, so don't bother wearing them because they don't work. Over time, the view came around to face masks are really important. You should wear them.
Yes.
So in a matter of, what has it been, 2 months, we've gone to face masks are critical. Face masks don't work. Face masks are critical. So we've seen a complete 360 in about 2 months. The important thing for a solution like this is not only to offer the most current view of what the correct medical procedure is, but the ability to adapt in conditions that approach real time to our evolving understanding of what the best medical procedure is. So it's about not only about providing a capability, but providing a way of rapidly modeling and deploying capability. So the test protocol platform and the process model that supports that platform, that ability to model and deploy is as important, if not more important, than the model itself.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what's really interesting, because, if we bring it back to the UK, the government is to keep trying to hit their 100,000 tests, per day, I believe, and they're struggling, let's put it this way, to reaching that target. But even if they were to reach that potential, if you're starting to getting results coming on those tests, how can you make sure that those results are quality data? If I receive a home test, let's say through my post box tomorrow, and I test myself and it says I'm negative and I'm positive, or one of those two, how can I be sure of those results? These are basic tests, or the data that is being used in your modeling or in your forecasting tool. How useful are those test results?
It's a great question, Walid. A lot of the debate around testing, in my mind, is a false dichotomy. It's well understood that the rapid home test kits aren't accurate enough to be useful for diagnostic purposes. If you're going to base medical advice to somebody on a test, you need to know that that test is good, because you're taking someone's life into your hands.
Exactly.
So the threshold for accuracy and specificity of a diagnostic test must be very, very high, or it's not useful. However, diagnostic purposes are only one of, in my mind, of three purposes that we want to do the testing. A test that is, say, 90% accurate is still not accurate enough to be of use for diagnostic purpose. But a test of even 70% of accuracy is still good enough to be of use in epidemiology. If I want to know where in a country or in a large workforce we are having an outbreak of the disease, being able to see with 70% accuracy is actually plenty to know, there's a problem in this community, or there's a problem in this factory. Okay, I can start making some really important decisions about how to deploy more accurate testing equipment, about which factories to shut down, which ones to open, with a far less accurate test. So epidemiology, the standard of accuracy is not the same, and the fact that home kits can scale and I can get them into people's hands much more quickly means that they're incredibly valuable. The third way in which testing is valuable is in treatment. Right now, the best way that we have of treating people who are critically ill, and I'm talking about people in ICUs, people who are at serious risk, is with blood serum of people who've been through the disease. A regime of home testing could identify those people who would be the most likely serum donors. So the trick to defining a good testing protocol is having a multi-tier strategy where you are testing in a rapid test format your entire population, your entire workforce, your entire group of employees, and then based on that test, making decisions about who gets the more accurate lab test. So designing a good protocol means understanding the strengths and weaknesses and capabilities of each of the various kinds of tests and building a protocol that takes advantage of the best of each.
And also, just to confirm something, those test results, or the test result that I get when I do a test, does that get shared via the immunity passport? How does that get shared?
So the US, so far as I know, has the most rigorous standards on anonymization and de-identification of data. Those standards are found in two sets of regulation, one called HIPAA and one called CMS. Mm-hmm. We exceed those standards in terms of how we anonymize and de-identify our data. So the test results that are tied to you are on your passport and never leave.
Okay.
The anonymized test results go into our analytical data store and are available for identifying where disease outbreaks are happening, where communities that are growing immune are starting to take hold. And even in an anonymized and de-identified fashion, you are, as the holder of the passport, providing consent or indeed withholding consent for the data to be used even in that way. You are providing consent for the data to be used even in an anonymized and de-identified way. Moreover, that anonymized and de-identified data can never be linked back to you. There's no way to query it.
Okay, because what I'm curious to know is that, there are research labs all around the world who are trying to work, on identifying a vaccine. And part of that is being able to access large data sets. Can that data be shared, of course, with my consent, all the way to research labs to help them develop solutions, vaccines?
Absolutely. One of the consents that we ask for is to geotag the test results. You can say no, you don't have to. But if you let us geotag it, that gives a lot of analytical insight into the spread of the disease.
So let's move on to other issues that governments are facing, and one is around supply chain. It's about being able to get access to quality kits, because we keep hearing in the press on a regular basis of this hospital, this fire station ordering PPE, protective equipment, only from China or other sources, and finding out that the product never arrives, or B, it is defective. Are you addressing that problem?
Absolutely. And as I said, Blok Bioscience is a mix of medical technology and supply chain experts, because supply chain is critical. Most of the test capability, the ability to manufacture both the high accuracy lab tests and the scalable rapid tests, comes from China. This is true for two reasons. One is that much of the world's manufacturing capability in general comes from China. And two, of course, because China was the first country to have to tackle COVID in a serious way. So the world at this point is largely dependent on China for capacity. This is changing as we speak. Manufacturing capabilities are emerging in other places as well. But China is still the locus of the expertise at this point. We're addressing the supply chain issue in a couple ways. One is that we have very good working relationships with Chinese industry. We have the ability to source tests from China, at least on the days when China feels like allowing any company to export tests. Because of those relationships, we also have the ability to license the IP of those tests and engage in a business partnership with these Chinese manufacturers to stand up locally sourced manufacturing capability here in the UK, or indeed in any of the countries that we are currently talking with. And that allows for a much more secure and reliable supply chain that is being manufactured and delivered in the country where it's required. It allows for the logistics to be far simpler.
Yeah, no, I very much like the idea, about being able to, to license, the manufacturing of these products, more on local shores, because that, facilitates a lot of the challenges that is happening from a supply chain standpoint.
No, indeed. And here in the UK, it even creates the possibility that we can have a UK industry that is actually an exporter.
Yes.
So it's attractive from a pure business standpoint as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. Something that we also hear quite often in the press is, is regarding contact tracing. And that brings, some challenges. It has proven to work quite effectively in some of the Southeast Asian countries in terms of limiting the spread of the virus. It has attracted some large organizations such as Apple and Google, who have worked together in launching a contact and trace application. Is this something that you're looking to include within your solution?
Yes and no. There's a conundrum associated with contact trace. On the one hand, it is exactly the sort of capability that many people do not want governments to have, which is to record the movements of its populace. On the other hand, there is incontrovertible evidence that contact trace capability is of inestimable value in fighting infectious disease. These statements are both true, and I think they are both self-evident. So, as a group of thought leaders who are defining a COVID management solution, we can't just say, sorry, we can't do contact trace because it violates our principles on self-sovereign data. We have to provide some way to address that very real and valid need. On the other hand, we have no interest in enabling a big brother state. So what we've decided to do is to provide an integration capability to any of the credible and accepted contact trace solutions. You mentioned the Apple Google one. Australia is using one. Singapore is using one. Any of these solutions, we will provide the ability to integrate, and we will provide that integration capability through an encrypted pipe that never touches our data, so that we retain the full self-sovereignty of our solution. But because, as I said, it needs to be holistic, it needs to be end-to-end, we will provide the necessary integration so that a government or a large company who's fighting an outbreak can understand that data and get what they need without us being an enabler of the kind of surveillance capability that a lot of people are fairly uncomfortable with.
Agreed. It is definitely a conundrum because, as you said, on one side, it does provide, some immediate value in fighting COVID-19, but there are, liberty implications here. We saw, unfortunately, after September 11th, some of the consequences of having freedoms taken away and very rarely ever returned. But yeah, it is a conundrum. And another aspect which we touched upon, at the beginning of the podcast was, how fast things change. Governments, as you said, at the beginning, advised for masks, and they went against masks, and they came back to supporting masks. From a development standpoint, when you're building a solution, how can you build it in a manner that it can constantly adapt to these different protocols or different procedures that the lawmakers are providing us?
Well, I don't want to go too much into our secret sauce, but
come on, just a little bit.
The key is designing the framework on which you build the protocols so that the components, whether they are home tests or CLIA tests or ELISA tests or PCR tests, various kind of symptoms, various kind of lack of symptoms, can be combined as building blocks that allow governments and enterprise to modify the protocols almost in real time. Coupled with that is a staging ability so that, again, governments and enterprise can get one step ahead. They can be aware of an emerging change in medical point of view. They can model that, plan the release of it, and be able to react accordingly. And instead of playing catch up, can be ahead of the game and says, our current view, or actually an early view, was that you needed to be free of symptoms for 14 days before you were not contagious. The latest view that I have heard, and keep in mind, things change so fast, I could be wrong by the time this podcast airs. The latest view I've heard is 3 days. The protocol, therefore, needs to allow government and enterprise to configure the number of days you have to be symptom-free whenever it needs to. It needs to change the level of body temperature that's considered indicative versus not indicative of COVID. It needs to be able to change all of these things and to plan the release of those changes in advance. And to my mind, providing that flexibility, that capability to adapt to evolving medical knowledge is probably even more important than getting the current state correct, because the current state will be incorrect within a few days anyway.
No, agreed. So your platform is going to be getting a huge amount of insights, circulating through it. Are you going to be having some kind of a analytics and insights facility so that lawmakers can get access to data very rapidly, or even large enterprises to be able to make informed decisions?
Absolutely. That's a key part of the overall solution. We need to look at operational reporting, which allows you to monitor your supply chain, the effectiveness of your testing strategy, the degree to which your workforce is able to return to work. We need to provide analytical capability like geospatial mapping to identify where the hotspots are, where growth of immunity is, where supply chain bottlenecks are. We need to provide supply chain provenance. If there's a batch of test kits that are inaccurate or that don't work, we need to find out where they came from quickly and make sure that any other inaccurate tests are spotted and removed from the supply. These are supply chain problems, once again, coming back to blockchain, that people have been working on for several years now. So we can benefit from that. A lot of the best design work needed to do that sort of thing has already been done because of blockchain. And we're definitely taking advantage of that. Finally, when we get enough data, we can start doing some serious machine learning using a combination of supervised and unsupervised algorithms to actually get a step ahead and accelerate the growth of understanding driving medical science. To say, how long does the antibody take to confer immunity? How long does that immunity last? How accurate are the test kits? Not in a lab, but in real life. To give a specific example, one of the common kind of tests being used now is called the PCR test. And that's testing not the antibody, but the antigen, which is actual presence of the virus. The most commonly used PCR tests, the samples are obtained by using a swab at the back of the throat or at the back of the nose. It is possible to collect that swab yourself in a home environment. But because you have to put the swab so far back into your throat or back into your nose that you will gag, the accuracy when you do it yourself is much lower than when a qualified medical professional does that. How much worse? We don't know. That is exactly the sort of understanding that machine learning can enable, potentially far more quickly than was previously possible.
Great. So as you know, we have a number of insurers who listen to this podcast, and I'm wondering can insurance companies, for example, access the data to help them understand their risk exposure from a business continuity side?
Absolutely, and in several stages. On the operational side, the data will be available very, very quickly. Our intent is to be, as generous as we can be in terms of sharing that, so that the world can fight this sooner. In a longer term, the machine learning aspect of it can be of probative and actuarial value in understanding and creating insurance products that are suitable for combating this sort of exposure in the future.
Brilliant. So my next question is, when are you planning to go live with your application, and when do you think individuals will be able to hold one of your immunity passports?
Our go live is planned in stages. The demand for getting the testing capability into people's hands is so high that we have created a rapid deployment website that's available now. So we can get the physical tests into people's hands, get people tested, and providing a very simple website for capturing that data that is ready now. The app itself, with the self-sovereign immunity passport, will be ready in about 8 to 10 weeks. And there will be a series of releases following that with increased levels of capability and increased scalability.
Now, just, I guess, a more somber note, where today we're the 7th of May, it's just close to 1800. And according to Johns Hopkins University, we have 3.8 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world, with nearly 265,000 dead. It's great to hear, about the work that you're doing, Areiel. It is definitely something, that we need to have these kind of solutions out on the market that are effective at fighting COVID-19, but also that are here to protect, our data and our privacy. Insureblocks itself, we're working on a white paper that looks at how can we build a more resilient world post-COVID-19. So your insights will definitely feature into that. And I also would like to invite you on a webinar to come and discuss this report. So talking about webinars, I understand you're going to be featuring in a webinar on Thursday the 14th at 1800 UK time. Do you want to say a few words about that webinar?
Sure. This webinar is on how we are using these technologies, blockchain and machine learning, in the fight against COVID. It's a survey not only of the work that we're doing, but of the state of the industry in general. It's part of Erica Stanford's Crypto Curry series, which I've spoken at several times in the past, and I believe you know them as well.
Yeah.
It's free, and anybody who wants to attend can just sign up on Eventbrite and come along.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to thank you very much, Areiel, because I'm afraid we're out of time. But thank you for sharing with us the great work you're doing in building this end-to-end solution against COVID-19. This wraps up this Insureblocks podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please stay safe, apply social distancing, and hopefully very soon you'll all have in your hands, an immunity passport. Areiel, always great to have you on board, and I look forward to recording a new podcast with you in the near future.
Thanks, Walid. Happy to come back anytime.